Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Brassard. I am the Member of Parliament for Barrie South Innisfil. I'm also Chair of the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics. Today, as Chair of the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics, I presented to the House of Commons a report on the review of the Conflict of Interest Act. The committee conducted a thorough review of this important piece of legislation, which remains practically unchanged since its enactment 20 years ago. The committee held 13 public meetings. We heard from 23 witnesses, including the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner, and we received 2 briefs. The report provides an overview of the Conflict of Interest Act and ways in which it could be improved to be more effective. We were particularly interested in the provisions of the Act setting out its purpose and the definition of personal interest, as well as those relating to compliance measures, such as the divestment of controlled assets through blind trusts or sale, and conflict of interest screens. The committee concluded that amending the purpose of the Act and its definition of personal interest would effectively minimize the possibility of conflicts arising between the private interests and public duties of reporting public office holders, such as ministers and the Prime Minister. With that in mind, the review of the Conflict of Interest Act gave us an opportunity to shed further light on its application to Prime Minister Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, but more importantly, to the position of Prime Minister itself now and into the future. The report contains 20 recommendations to the Government of Canada, including to add the concept of appearance of conflict of interest explicitly in the Conflict of Interest Act. We also recommend granting the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner the power to impose sanctions in the event of a breach of the substantive provisions of the Act and stricter requirements for reporting public office holders, particularly for the position of Prime Minister. Indeed, the committee considers that the Act should be amended to establish separate rules for the position of Prime Minister because individuals with greater decision-making authority should be held and must be held to higher standards. And finally, the committee recommends designating the leaders of political parties, including those who are not members of Parliament, as reporting public office holders for the purposes of the Conflict of Interest Act's application. Those are my remarks. Madame Lapointe.
Ouais. Alors, bonjour à vous tous. Je suis Linda Lapointe, fière députée de Rivière-des-Mille-Îles, députée libérale. Je suis vice-présidente du comité permanent de l'accès à l'information et de la protection des renseignements personnels et à l'éthique. Comme disait notre président, on a fait une étude sur l'étude justement qui était sur la loi du lobbying, la revision. Comme équipe parlementaire, on a fait un rapport dissident sur la loi sur le conflit d'intérêts. Ce qui a été écrit dans le rapport, ça a été voté par les oppositions. Vous savez sûrement qu'on est minoritaire sur le comité. Donc, l'opposition a produit un rapport qui ne tient pas compte de l'importance des témoignages d'experts entendus par le comité de l'éthique. 2 commissaires à l'éthique provinciaux en exercice, le commissaire fédéral à l'éthique, ainsi que des juristes et praticiens expérimentés, ont témoigné que les fiducies sans droit de regard fonctionnent. Et nous avons entendu des éléments de preuve confirmant que les mesures de conformité du premier ministre sont rigoureuses et efficaces. L'opposition, les oppositions ont choisi de l'ignorer. Le rapport recommande l'utilisation d'un terme paradis fiscal qu'une des principales spécialistes du droit fiscal de notre pays a dit au comité qu'elle ne reconnaissait pas et qu'elle refusait d'utiliser. C'est la professeure Alison Christians. L'opposition veut restreindre la règle d'application générale au point où le premier ministre et le cabinet ne pourraient plus gouverner. Il ne s'agit pas d'une réforme en matière d'éthique, mais d'une obstruction déguisée en politique. Ils veulent retirer de la loi le principe même qui encourage les Canadiens talentueux et expérimentés à briguer les fonctions publiques. Au moment précis où le Canada a besoin de ses meilleurs atouts à la table de décision, nous voulons des dirigeants qui ont réellement bâti quelque chose, qui ont accompli quelque chose et qui ont une expertise réelle à offrir à notre pays, comme notre premier ministre. Et non des politiciens de carrière comme on connaît le chef de l'opposition, qui n'a jamais rien fait en dehors de la politique. La professeure Laurie Turnbull l'a dit clairement au comité. On ne peut jamais créer des règles d'éthique autour des individus. Ce n'est pas le but. Il s'agit d'un rapport partisan conçu pour cibler une seule personne et nous ne supportons pas ce rapport et on ne laissera pas passer ça.
OK, merci, Mme Lapointe. Maintenant, on va à M. Hardy pour les commentaires sur le rapport. M. Hardy.
Merci beaucoup. Donc, Gabriel Hardy, député de Montmorency-Charlevoix. Je suis sur le comité d'éthique depuis bientôt 1 an. Donc, nouvellement élu. Je vais faire la révision, puis je vais répondre un peu à ce qui se passe ici dans le contre-argument. Le poste de premier ministre, c'est le poste le plus haut du pays. C'est le premier des ministres, donc devrait avoir des responsabilités qui sont un encadrement qui est exceptionnel. On ne peut pas diriger un pays tout en ayant des intérêts financiers personnels qui peuvent bénéficier son portefeuille. Puis ça place le pays dans une situation où est-ce que les gens perdent confiance parce qu'ils se disent est-ce que la personne est là pour s'avantager ou est là finalement pour les intérêts des Canadiens. Et à partir du moment où il y a apparence de conflit d'intérêts, il devra avoir une étude approfondie. Donc, ce n'est pas une question d'attaquer la personne en place présentement, c'est de réaliser qu'on est dans une position qui, pour la première fois dans l'histoire, arrive avec cette envergure-là. Est-ce que notre système qui est vieux de 20 ans est capable de la gérer correctement? Alors, le comité était clair, plus le pouvoir est grand, plus les règles devraient être strictes. La fiducie sans droit de regard n'est pas suffisante. Pourquoi? Parce que la personne sait exactement ce qu'il y a dans son portefeuille. Puis les Canadiens, ils doivent avoir 100% confiance dans les décisions qui se prennent. Puis la preuve qu'on a eue, c'est qu'on a eu M. Sabia, qui est évidemment très, très proche de M. Carney, puisqu'il travaille directement sous lui, qui nous a dit que lui, pour bien faire son travail, il a vendu ses parts dans Brookfield. Et là, je suis content que Mme Linda nous présente aujourd'hui le fait que on a parlé de paradis fiscaux. Mais Brookfield, alors que c'était le premier ministre qui dirigeait Brookfield, a été reconnu comme une des plus grandes entreprises d'évitement fiscal au pays. Alors, comment on ne peut pas passer ça sous silence? Comment on peut laisser ça passer et avoir un premier ministre qui, après ça, prend des décisions, puis on dit aux Canadiens, posez-vous pas de questions, la vie va être belle. Il faisait de l'évitement fiscal avant, mais là, il n'y a rien qui s'est passé depuis pour essayer de le contrôler et toutes les décisions vont être prises dans l'intérêt des Canadiens. Donc, c'est ça qui a été analysé, pas M. Mark Carney. C'est la situation et ce qui se passe présentement. Donc, il y a des points clés. Puis, quand je dis que les Canadiens perdent confiance dans le système, on a un rapport ici de Statistique Canada qui est clair. 28% des Canadiens ont une forte confiance envers le Parlement fédéral. Ça veut dire quoi? C'est qu'il y a 72% du monde qui pense que ça se passe pas bien. Alors, je pense que c'est normal qu'on pose des questions. Quand Mme Lapointe nous dit aujourd'hui que il n'y avait pas le contrôle, bien, ils viennent de le prendre en passant. M. McKinnon a annoncé qu'il allait prendre le plein contrôle de chacun des comités. Donc, les questions qui étaient plus que légitimes qu'on pose depuis 1 an, bien, ça se peut que vous n'entendiez moins parler d'un prochain temps parce que malgré le fait que ce n'est pas la démocratie qui a décidé il y a 1 an de mettre un gouvernement majoritaire avec des deals par en arrière, qu'on pourrait dire, ils vont prendre le plein contrôle des comités à partir de la semaine prochaine. Donc, comme M. Brassard vous l'a dit, il y a des grandes recommandations qui sont excessivement importantes. L'apparence de conflit d'intérêts devrait faire partie de la loi sur l'éthique. Le premier ministre devrait se départir complètement de ses avoirs. Et pourquoi? Qui est une autre des recommandations. Parce qu'on entend parler depuis presque 1 an du fait qu'on est dans une situation exceptionnelle qui demande des pouvoirs exceptionnels et qui demande des actions exceptionnelles. Bien, si c'est le cas, M. Carney devrait faire une séparation avec ce qui était son ancienne vie et prendre chaque décision dans l'intérêt des Canadiens, ne laisser aucune chance aux gens de penser que ce n'est pas le cas. Alors, c'est une autre des recommandations. J'en ai plusieurs, là, puis je ne prendrai pas, évidemment, 10 minutes, vous allez être capable de lire tout ça. Plus de transparence et des sanctions qui sont à la hauteur des potentiels conflits d'intérêts. Si on découvre un conflit, il devrait y avoir des sanctions à la hauteur de l'argent qui a été pris à même les Canadiens. Alors, c'est ce que vous allez lire dans le rapport. Donc, on est là pour répondre aux questions. J'avais évidemment beaucoup de notes à prendre, mais je me rends compte que je parle beaucoup trop. Donc, voilà. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Merci beaucoup. On va passer maintenant aux périodes de questions. We'll start in the room. If anyone has a question, please use... Okay, great. We'll start with Mari Wolf from the Globe and Mail.
Yeah, hi. I noted that the Liberal members of the committee dissented from the report, and I wondered, Mr. Brassard. Pardon. Oui, j'attends. Pardon. Ça va? I noted that the Liberal members of the committee dissented from the report. And Mr. Brassard, I wondered if you could comment on that and whether this actually effectively emasculates the entire inquiry and means that the House will not adopt it because you simply won't have the numbers on the floor.
Well, Mary, thanks for the question. I think it was clear that there were differing opinions on where we landed in the report. Madame Lapointe made her points very clearly. Mr. Hardy did as well. Look, the requirement here is once we present, the report was presented today, as you know, and then the government will respond. What the committee did in its deliberations, and a majority of the committee made the recommendations, was what we thought reflected accurately not just the testimony of the witnesses. There's a differing of opinion on that, of course, as Ms. Lapointe stated, but it really is to provide confidence to Canadians that, the Conflict of Interest Act is strong, that it's actually working. We had the commissioner come before the committee and ask for greater powers. Some of the recommendations provide that for him. The other issue, the big issue, and this is where members of the opposition felt strongly, and it's very important that I make clear that it doesn't just impact the current Prime Minister, but we're also talking about future Prime Ministers as well. If you want to hold the highest office in the land and you want the power and the privilege that goes with that, there should be no determination or no thought that a Prime Minister or ministers or parliamentary secretaries are in a conflict of interest. And so one of the things that the committee recommended is complete divestment of assets. And I think that's very important to provide Canadians with confidence, clear confidence, that whoever is in the office of the Prime Minister or ministers or parliamentary secretaries are not making decisions in their own personal interests, that they're actually making decisions that are in the interests of the country. We also had a lot of discussion about the blind trust. That came up in testimony. There is a recommendation that the blind trust be administered by people other than political appointees. And let's be clear. I mean, if I had a blind trust, I would know what was in that blind trust, and I know what those investments would be. The Prime Minister very clearly knows what's in his blind trust, and the way to assure confidence for Canadians is for complete divestment. I know the counter-argument to that is that we're not going to attract the best and the brightest to those positions. I happen to think that the position of the Prime Minister and the position that it holds and the power that it holds, we can still attract people and make sure that we provide Canadians with confidence that they're not, whoever is in that position is not in it for themselves, that they're in it for the betterment of Canada and Canadians as well. Thank you.
Yes, just as a follow-up, you recommend that there be a sliding scale of penalties, which, as you pointed out, the Commissioner himself asked for. Did you have that in mind? Did you have the case of Christian Fox in mind when you came up with that recommendation, given that the Ethics Commissioner did find that she breached the rules, but has so far at least faced no penalty, or at least he did not have the power to impose them?
Sorry, Mary, I missed the example that you gave.
Well, it was the Deputy Minister in the Department of Defence.
Yeah, that issue happened just recently.
Yeah.
It just came to light. It wasn't part of the discussion or any of the deliberations that we made in that recommendation. There's a general belief out there that the conflict of interest penalties are not deterrent enough, and that they should be higher. And part of the recommendation is for the government to come back with what that sliding scale would look like in consultation with the Ethics Commissioner. And I think if there's a sincere attempt to deal with the recommendations that have been given in this report, I expect that the government will discuss that with the Ethics Commissioner to allow for greater power, as you state, to impose fines and penalties on breaches of ethics. Okay, thank you.
Jillian Piper from Global News.
Hello, thanks for taking questions today. Indigenous Services Minister Mandy Gilmasti has been serving in government for about a year without a public conflict of interest declaration, which is 7 months after the disclosure deadline. Is that acceptable to you, and do you think we need greater enforcement of those disclosure deadlines?
I do think we need greater enforcement of those disclosure deadlines. Every member of Parliament, including ministers, understand their obligation under the Act to disclose, and I was actually shocked and disappointed when I first read that she had not disclosed those. So I'm not sure whether the committee will be seized with that and try to get an answer to it, but I know that obviously the Office of the Ethics Commissioner is dealing with that. But there should be an obligation on the part. Every member knows what their obligation is to disclose, and it's unfortunate that she's not at this point.
Just to follow up, it's not only Ms. Gilmasti. There's 26 MPs right now from the Liberals, from the Conservatives, from the Bloc Québécois who have not disclosed or it's stuck in the office. But the Ethics Commissioner's office says that they're still waiting for a signature or further information. Are you concerned that having dozens of MPs with no public conflict of interest documents erodes Canadians' trust in our parliamentary systems and procedures?
I go back to what I said. Every MP, regardless of what political party that they're affiliated with, one of the first things that we understand when we come to this place is that we have an obligation to disclose under the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Act. Obviously it's up to the Ethics Commissioner to administer that, but the obligation and onus falls on the Member of Parliament. And so regardless of which political party it is, my expectation is that that obligation would be fulfilled.
Go ahead.
Hello, Ben Andrews with the Ottawa Citizen. I want to follow up on the sliding scale for penalties. In making that recommendation, did you have a sense or an idea of what you would like those penalties to look like?
I think the general discussion is that it has to be more of a deterrent to members of Parliament to make sure that they're working within the law. There's been a lot of discussion. It even came up in the last election campaign that the deterrent is not enough. So as I said to Ms. Wolf, I would leave that to the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner to determine what that scale should be and make a recommendation. Part of the recommendation that we made was not to apply a number to it, but that this discussion needs to take place and there has to be greater deterrent.
Was the goal of acting as a deterrent for senior public servants considered as well?
Designated public office holders form the basis of that discussion, and that would include prime ministers, ministers, and parliamentary secretaries. The other thing that we also included in one of the recommendations is leaders of political parties who are either elected to the House or not elected as part of the regime to fall under the Conflict of Interest Act, and we felt that that was an important element to any recommendation that we made as well. Thank you.
So I don't see anyone with the raised hand on. Oh.
Sorry, say that again.
Sorry, I was just.
Okay.
I'm just going to Zoom here. I don't see anyone with the raised hand for a question. So if you don't mind, I'll check in the room if there's any other follow-up questions anyone had.
I'd like to perhaps give Mr. Hardy and Ms. Lapointe an opportunity to give their perspective on some of the questions that were asked. I know, Ms. Wolf, you asked a question. We'll start with Mr. Hardy and then maybe go to Madame Lapointe afterwards. Go ahead, Mr. Hardy.
Just following up on your question, and I'm going to answer in English because I think it's going to be easier for you. We've heard on the committee often that it's a right for a citizen at one point to become prime minister or minister or whatever. We feel strongly that it's a privilege. And sometime when you look at your past, maybe you should consider not maybe running for an election because your past is maybe not clean enough to have that position. And I feel like it's important to stop saying I have the right to be here. No, you have the privilege at some point and you need to serve the people first. And if your actions of the past and even now are making people don't trust, you're hurting democracy. And I think it's something super important right now that we overcorrect that curve of people not trusting our system and making sure our decision is making sure that people trust and they feel like the government is there for them and spend the money for the good of the people. And so I think this is exactly what we came out with, a structure that is making sure Canadians trust the system. Thank you.
Madame Lapointe?
Je peux ajouter la façon que le rapport a fonctionné. Le comité on est 9 personnes, 3 conservateurs, 1 bloc, 4 libéraux. Et quand c'était le temps d'accepter les propositions ou les recommandations, Monsieur le Président allait toujours du côté des oppositions. C'est comme ça que ça a fonctionné. Et on n'a pas tenu compte des experts qui parlaient du fait qu'on a un des meilleurs systèmes au monde au niveau de l'éthique et des conflits d'intérêts. Puis ça, on l'a entendu souvent. Je veux dire, quand on parle de l'écran des fiducies sans droit de regard, le commissaire fédéral à l'éthique a confirmé que le premier ministre est entièrement conformé à la loi. Les biens sont détenus en fiducie sans droit de regard. Aucune communication avec le fiduciaire et un contrôle rigoureux des conflits d'intérêts fonctionnent exactement comme il se doit. Les 2 administrateurs, c'est-à-dire Michael Sebia, qui a quand même une feuille de route assez impressionnante, et Marc-André Blanchard, il s'agit de 2 personnes les plus expérimentées, puis c'est eux qui s'occupent d'entre la fiducie sans droit de regard et l'écran qui est mise en place et qui fait que, je veux dire, les décisions sont prises. M. Blanchard a décrit le système étant l'un des plus complets et rigoureux qu'il a vu dans toute sa carrière. Puis M. Sebia a déclaré tout aussi rigoureux que n'importe quel écran qu'il a vu dans le secteur privé. À peu près, il n'a jamais vu. Pourtant, il a de l'expérience, M. Sebia, il n'avait jamais vu ça. Et même le commissaire Van Finkenstein lui-même a confirmé que au comité, que l'écran fonctionne très bien. Et quand on parle de les conflits d'intérêts apparents qu'on a touchés un peu, la professeure Laurie Turnbull a établi une distinction claire. Le conflit d'intérêts apparent a sa place dans les codes de conduite et non dans les législations. Ces mots ont été directs. L'énumérer dans une loi commence à créer des problèmes en termes de va-et-vient sur la question de savoir s'il y a vraiment une apparence. C'est une experte qui a dit ça. C'est pas nous, c'est des gens de confiance qui ont fait plusieurs choses. D'ailleurs, l'ancien greffier du conseil privé, Michael Wetnick, a averti que les conflits d'intérêts perçus ne peuvent être décrits avec beaucoup de clarté dans la législation. Et Scott Turnlow a averti que cela créerait plus de problèmes que cela n'en résoudrait. Fait que vous comprenez que nous, on n'était pas d'accord avec ça.
Could I ask as a follow-up?
Merci, Madame Lapointe. And just to comment after Madame Lapointe, in my role as chair, I'm not going to make any apologies for wanting to strengthen the Conflict of Interest Act and the rules that surround it. I happen to believe that Canadians need to have confidence in their designated public office holders. We heard testimony throughout the course of our study. One in particular disturbed me, and that was the fact that the Brookfield CFO had a meeting with Prime Minister Carney, basically the ability to make a phone call, and he ended up in the Prime Minister's office, despite the fact that an ethics screen has been set up against Brookfield. So I think that should concern anyone, that there's that much access to the Prime Minister's office by people that a so-called ethics screen, and that's why we made one of the recommendations that the ethics screen actually should be applied by nonpartisan people, not by political staffers who are appointed by the Prime Minister to work under his command. As Mr. Hardy said, Mr. Sabia had made it very clear that he divested himself of his Brookfield assets so that he would not give the appearance, real or otherwise, that he was conflicted through his Brookfield investments. So I'm not going to make any apologies for where I stood on this report, and I think it's a strong report. I also think that it can provide Canadians with a lot of confidence that the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Act is doing its job. If these recommendations are in fact applied by the government, and revisiting the law as we did from 2014. This has been 10 years since this act has been reviewed. I think we modernized the act to provide confidence to Canadians that the act needs to be strengthened and needs to be modernized as well. And I'll make it very clear, and I want to make this point very, very clear, that this is about the office of the Prime Minister, ministers and parliamentary secretaries. It's not about one particular Prime Minister. This will, if applied, And if the law is amended to reflect the recommendations that we made, that it will apply to all future prime ministers and designated public office holders as well. Mary, you had a follow-up?
I did. I wanted to know which recommendations the Liberals support. For example, the sliding scale of penalties. Is it solely the blind trust and the question about tax havens that the Liberals are not supporting, or other bits of the report that you do like?
Si je comprends bien, vous faites référence auxquelles des recommandations qu'on supportait versus ceux qu'on ne supportait
Oui,
pas.
c'est ça.
On en a 20. Il faudrait vraiment que je prenne le temps de les regarder pour être certaine que je ne vous mets pas en erreur là-dessus. Parce qu'il n'y en a pas tellement qu'on supportait.
OK.
OK? Je dirais même l'ensemble, on ne les supportait pas. OK?
And I think, Mary, the dissenting report or the supplementary report that they provided shows very clearly that they are not in agreement with what the majority of members on the committee felt needed to be done.
Can I just, Niju, sorry, can I just one quick question, which is about the apparent conflict of interest. How would you define that? It seems slightly amorphous as a concept. Like, have you closely defined that because it's would be a new addition?
Well, maybe
I
give
can
Mr.
answer
Hardy
that.
a chance to answer that question.
The appearance of conflict of interest, you can find it elsewhere, so it's not something that is new. You can find it in the certain provinces as BC, so British Columbia, and either in other countries. So England, Scotland, Ireland. So this is something that is common. So the appearance is where you think that may be a conflict, and then the commissioner can have a look and see if it's just a perception or if it's a fact. So there can be an enquête. So enquête would be inquiry. So it's just to protect the public, and not to always, and I'm a super strong believer of prevention instead of always waiting to cure a problem. And I think it's exactly it. So if there's an appearance, let's dive into it right now and not wait until the problem is there. And then, we find out after and money has been spent and then all the population is kind of not super happy with it. And I would maybe conclude on this. Madame Lapointe just started by saying that is it president of the
Chair?
The chair?
Yeah.
So the chair ruled on the side of conservative or the opposition. But if it's a problem right now, I hope in the future she will say that, the committee needs to be neutral because now they have the control. So I guess that we will be able to still continue to do our work with the support of the Liberals. Thank you.
Je peux ajouter par rapport à la question que vous avez dit tantôt, ce qu'on pourrait résumer dans le fond, c'est un rapport qui n'est pas fondé sur les preuves. Il y a eu plusieurs recommandations qui ne reflétaient pas justement les témoignages des experts, puis certaines des recommandations semblaient cibler vers une seule personne plutôt que fondées sur des principes durables. Des témoins il y a eu des témoins qui avaient une expertise très limitée et qui ont été utilisés au même titre que des véritables experts reconnus, pas juste ici, mais à l'extérieur du pays, qui venaient des commissaires à l'éthique. Alors, puis, je veux dire, le comité éthique, je veux dire, on a travaillé très fort, tout le monde. Puis, je reconnais ici mes collègues, on en a mis tous les efforts, que ce soit de deux côtés, mais on a notre rapport dissident qui dit exactement ce qu'on pense et ce qu'on aurait voulu ou ce que le rapport se rende. Merci.
Okay, I'm going to conclude with just one last comment, and that is that I am gravely concerned regarding the recomposition of the committees. I'm not just the chair of the Ethics and Access to Information Privacy Committee. I'm also the committee coordinator for the party. These changes will have a profound impact on the ability of the oversight committees, whether it's government operations, public accounts, or the ethics committee, to dig deep and dive deep into issues like contracts, like ethics. And I'll remind everybody that, these committees, with a majority of membership held by the opposition, including the chair, were the ones that exposed the ArriveCan situation. We are the ones that exposed the Winnipeg Labs situation. Without a majority on those committees, it will limit and handcuff the ability to expose corruption, to expose cronyism, to expose the type of scandals that we've seen in the past. And so not just as the chair, but also as the committee coordinator, I am gravely concerned about the impact that this might have on committees going forward if these changes proposed in Motion 9 do move forward. And I know that we will be proposing to maintain the oversight committees as a majority-led opposition for the purposes that I stated earlier. And I just hope that the government House Leader sees the value and sees the logic in that. So that's all I have to say. Thank you for everything.
All right, thank you. That concludes this press conference.